everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wayne Public Library Virtual Jazz Series. I had the great pleasure and honor of chatting with Altin Sencalar today, so welcome.
Hey, Patty, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to getting into a nice discussion.
It's been wonderful that you and I have gotten to know each other over the last about 8 or 10 months since you performed here at the library. Both those recordings are on the Wayne Public Library YouTube page, so check them out for sure. One is with the Abuelita Mateus Quintet or Quartet.
Yeah, it was quartet. It was quartet.
And the other is with most recently Alton Sinclair's septet, and it was absolutely phenomenal. And it was highlighting his new CD, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But you're an incredible trombonist, and for anyone who has seen any of these jazz series, my father was a jazz trombonist, so I am very drawn to the instrument and to talking about it. So
Good.
I just want to share some information about how great you are, if you'll allow me.
Thank you. It's nice whenever the trombonist gets a high five.
So you were hailed by Stereophile magazine for sounding like a 21st century grandchild of J.J. Johnson and Kai Winding, or Kay Winding, right? Is it Kay?
There's a huge debate. I don't know.
Kay Kai Winding.
Yes, there you go.
You are a finalist or winner of every major jazz trombone competition, and I have the list here, which we'll touch on a little bit later. You've played on the two movie scores for children, as well as independent films. You're a university professor, currently at Iona University outside of New York City.
Mm-hmm.
You're an educator, composer, and trombonist, and there's so much I want to talk about. So the amazing thing is how much you've accomplished in such a short amount of time.
Thank you. Yeah, the hustle does not stop. At least not right now.
Now, you were exposed to music, I believe, by your aunt and uncle who were band directors and exposed to a lot of different genres.
So yeah, so my aunt and uncle have been band directors in Texas for 30 years, something like that. Something in that range. And basically like I would take the opportunity, or like my aunt and my uncle would take me off my mom's hands because I grew up with a single mother, and so they would take me off my mom's hands, give her a break, and then take me to like the band hall, and they would be like doing some inventory or something like that, and I was just basically walking around a bunch of brass instruments all the time. My aunt's a clarinet player, but my uncle's a tuba player, and so they would just kind of let me have free reign. And I remember I picked, or I don't remember, they told me that I picked up like a baritone or euphonium, and I just started blowing on it. Not that it sounded good because it probably did not. Um, and they were just like, yeah, you just like went to that instrument, and then whenever I was 10 or 11, I started playing in band, and I had the euphonium as my first choice. So that was really cool. And then as far as like the genre thing, I always got to like listen to a bunch of music, but it was never like band music. It was more so like just like pop contemporary music. I listened to a lot of Latin music back in the day because my mom really liked Ricky Martin, Christina Aguilera whenever she had her little spout, and then within the Latin scene. And then we'd always listen to like Celia Cruz because that's who my mom is named after. But my mom's not a musician. She's a financial controller, so she's like the furthest thing. But we were always listening to music in the car, and I lived. I grew up in Temple, Texas, which is a pretty small town between Dallas and Austin, and it's like a town of like 45,000 people, and uh, and so we would always go to Austin because it was closer. So it was like an hour away, and Austin is labeled as like the live music capital of the world, but it's really cool because there's literally gigs there every day. I mean, whenever I lived there, I was playing 4 to 5 nights a week, of all different music. So like just driving down any one of like the downtown major areas, like you just heard music all the time. But that's kind of where I was exposed to like live music and then like the band world and stuff like that. But I really didn't get fully sold into it till probably like jazz band in seventh grade.
Now, your first focus was classical, I believe, was it not?
It was. I was extremely into being a classical euphonium player, and I can make that joke now because I uh, I've I've done recordings and been a guest artist for like International Tuba Euphonium Association, all that. And it's funny thinking about it, like wanting to be a classical euphonium player at that time because I was very much into like the soloist work or whatnot of euphonium players too. That's what they primarily have to do if they're gonna have like a viable career. But what I didn't know was like how limiting it can be as well, which is why like whenever I was doing like Tanglewood or like any kind of lessons, like I did Tanglewood here if in Lenox, Massachusetts, whenever I was like 15. I got to study with the great Mike Borland, who's the principal tubist of the Boston Symphony Orchestra and the Pops. And he's an amazing player and he's a great guy. And we've actually kept in touch over the years, slightly. And I just remember like seeing like how serious and dedicated he was to like being a tuba player and euphonium player. I was like, wow, that's amazing. And that I certainly wanted to go after that trajectory. But jazz stole my heart.
It seals a lot of people's hearts, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So, for those who are watching this who may not be as familiar with euphonium, you don't really see a lot of euphonium in jazz, but I just wanted to highlight some of the differences and the similarities to trombone. So, the euphonium is part of, as you said, the tuba family.
Hmm.
It can play up to 5 octaves and it has valves, whereas a trombone generally has a slide, unless it's, of course, a valve trombone.
Right.
Um, and it has the same size mouthpiece as a trombone.
Hmm. Hmm.
I believe the euphonium is like a tenor, um,
Tuba.
tenor tuba, and then it functions in an ensemble like a cello in an orchestra.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So
Yes.
do you also then? I guess you play valve trombone if you have valve
Yes.
trombone.
Of course. Just one tidbit about euphonium. The North University of North Texas Jazz Program was actually one of their founders was a jazz euphonium player, Rich Madison. So euphonium is like a chameleon. It can really fit wherever you want it to fit. I've recorded euphonium on my albums. Um, yeah, and nobody's ever been like boo, so not that thing.
We have the great honor of having William Patterson's student ensembles perform here as part of our
Hmm.
jazz series, spring and fall. And in one of the last ones, we had an ensemble where the trombonist Richard LaRoche performed with his euphonium.
Oh, yeah, Richard's great. Yeah,
He is great. And
yeah.
so with trombone and euphonium, and it's the first time actually that I had seen it, and I was very taken with it, extremely taken with the sound, the tone,
Mm,
and I feel like we need to see more of that and more of that in a live setting. I tend not to see that very much, so that's my task to you.
mm. Well, that might be coming soon. I'll tell you that much. I love I've recorded euphonium on two of my albums, and I always had a really fun time with it.
So if you could just give us a little bit about the difference between a slide trombone and then the bass trombone.
Ah, okay. So so the way it works. So we have so I have some behind me. So this is what we call like a F attachment trombone. This is not my normal horn that I use. I use a straight trombone, it's the one without this. Um, but this is like an F attachment helps add clarity to the lower register for the tenor trombone. And this is a 547 bore. So that's how many millimeters it is of like how wide the opening is for this mouthpiece, right? However, on a bass trombone, you have two two valves and they're pitched differently. So for example, you have this first valve like I had, but then you have a second valve, which has more clarity to the lower register. If you see there's more tubing, right? And this is a wider um bore. So that's a 547 bore. This is a 562 bore, or it can go up to 572. Um, if you want it to be like that huge of a blow. Some people like that. I'm not that person, but to each their own. That's the beauty about playing brass instruments. Like some people love certain things about them, and some people hate certain things about them. For me, I like the path of least resistance. So I like having to just pick up my horn and just play it the way I want to, right? And with bass trombone, you can do that too if like you're set up to do that. And I actually double on bass trombone. Right now, I'm subbing on Broadway for Heart of Rock and Roll, and so I get to play bass trombone in a few of those in the pit a little bit, and it's great. But my heart comes with tenor, not this one, but my jazz tenor that I use.
And the
And
size
that one
of the
is
mouthpiece is the same, or is the bass trombone
so
just
no. So the bass trombone and the tenor trombone, these two are both large shank, but what's like the best way to describe? Okay, it's like getting an oil change and you have a 5 quart oil tank, and then you have a 6 quart oil tank. Or sorry, a 5.5 quart oil tank. So it's like you could get by playing. You could get by with like just buying uh uh um uh five oil pints if you want, but you're not gonna have enough to fill it up. All right. So you need a slightly larger mouthpiece on bass trombone to play. So it's a different setup and it's a different airstream. And it's the same thing with this horn versus my small jazz tenor, the one without the F attachment. The small jazz tenor that I do have, it's a 500 bore, so it's a much more lighter feel. I don't have to try as hard. And, you know, I used to play jazz on a horn kind of like this, which is great because you get a really nice warm sound. But eventually, I wanted to play with a lot of efficiency. And for me, as a brass player, efficiency is the name of the game. I don't care who you are. If you're always doing this heavy lifting, you're gonna bruise one day.
is it hard to change your embouchure between songs and instruments, or is it?
So it's not necessarily a change in the embouchure. It's more a change in your airstream. So the one thing we as humans are born doing correctly, the one thing is breathing. Okay. We're like, whenever we're being delivered, we're breathing. So like I'll be 30 in July. I would say that at this point, I'm an expert at breathing. I think that's fair to say. I think a 10-year-old is an expert at breathing. I think a 5-year-old is too, right? You could also make the argument that a 2-year-old is. But you see, like it's not about the inputs. Okay, like the input we have down. We're born doing that correctly. It's about the output. And depending on like what you're playing, like for me, whenever I play bass trombone, I have to I have to slow my air down, not lessen it, slow it down. So like instead of playing with a normal air stream like I do, like I'll show you a quick example. That's like my normal airstream, pretty fast, intense, very directional. On bass trombone, that'll have to be, that's a much different outward sound as well. You don't really hear me breaking the sound barrier, and that's not because you can't. I guess some people can, but for me, whenever I play bass trombone, I have to allow the instrument to be filled up and to respond differently as opposed to if I was playing tenor. With tenor, I can, for lack of better words, use and abuse and manipulate the horn to whatever I want to do. And I'm very lucky to have that. I'm very lucky to have that option with tenor. With bass, I really have to be subservient to what the bass trombone needs. It's vice versa. I'm sure like some bass trombonists have to like really gear up to play tenor in a very light and correct manner. So it's all about it's all about the awareness of your tendencies as a brass player.
Thank you. It's a really great explanation. I now understand.
Oh, good, good. I think hopefully if my colleague at the university is watching, he'll be like, "You should teach brass method."
We're going to touch a little bit on, not a little bit, we're going to touch a lot on the fact of your being an educator, but I want to just talk a little bit about your time in Texas. So you
Mm-hmm,
attended Texas State University, and then you moved to
mm-hmm,
Austin to attend University of Texas at Austin's
mm-hmm,
Butler School of Music, and got your bachelor's degree from there, and you studied under Andre Hayward.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I also got to study at Texas State with Freddie Mendoza. That was like he really whipped me into shape. Like the fun. So Freddie, I owe Freddie a lot. Freddie. So he has lupus, and he's had a very hardship life with his disease. However, Freddie is the only person I know that has had to relearn how to play trombone 3 to 4 times as an adult and comes back. And so it's really a tribute to his genius of pedagogy. He's like an unsung hero. He didn't have like an album out of his own music, and I've like bugged him to do that. But Freddie is the kind of person that you meet, and like the reason why people sound good is because of numerous teachers, but there's always that one teacher that's like, man, this person like really laid it down for me. And I wish I was this age now to go back and study with them. And I wish I was this age now to study with Freddie. And I'm very grateful to have studied with Michael Dees and Andre. Those two have been so instrumental in my career, and I'm forever grateful. But it's like your first love. Like Freddie really gave me like so many tools. And I mean, I remember he used to chew me out, and he really put so much time into my flaws in order to correct them. And today, like, and I give it up for him every single time I tell him. Um, and he was extremely great at breaking down your exact wherever was happening right here. He was so good at just like figuring it out and then just like telling you exactly what you need to do in order to get rid of it. And so if it wasn't for Freddie, I would not have been able to study with Andre and Mike. I just want to give my props. I love
Oh,
Freddie.
of course, yeah. Well, I'm now going to shift gears then to talk about something I know it's passionate for you. It's just the generosity of musicians in the jazz world to mentor, and also
Mhm.
you as an educator and a mentor to others. What I found most amazing on your website, which is there's so much information there, but you have an entire section that is devoted to your teaching,
Mhm.
uh, your statement. You have a teaching statement, which I think is amazing. And what
Mhm.
I connected with on there is your focus is that you are trying to ascertain the learning style of your student. And this goes across the board. And I think this is what makes a great teacher, an educator, is understanding that the person who's learning may learn, as you explained, visually, orally, or kinesthetically.
Mhm.
And so, in doing so, you are tapping on how to build those foundational blocks. And that's what it sounds like Freddie Mendoza did for you.
Yeah, so for me, an excellent teacher is somebody that can tell you the same thing like 15 different ways, right? And it's because you'll encounter 15 different kind of students. I'm sure you can encounter hundreds of students, of course, but there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of overlap. People learn visually, people learn orally, people learn kinesthetically. I'm all three. And I've gone through all three phases. So currently I'm in the oral skills phase, which is like I just like just play it for me, and then I'll play it, right? Like that's fine. But before I was very aesthetic, like, oh, let me like figure it out, nuts and bolts, which is great. You should be. So that way you understand your physical tendencies. Because if you don't understand your physical tendencies as a musician, you're most likely going to come up to a roadblock one day. And I've come up to several. Luckily, none recently. But I came up to several, especially in school. I had two embouchure shifts, or really like two and a half. So been there, done that. And then with the visual thing, like I came from University of Texas at that time, had a huge focus on original music. So like I came from being able to just like sight read, no matter like what was in front of me, I knew I saw the beat separations, all that thing, all those things. So like I was very much in tune with original music and understanding how music works, almost like a Sudoku, especially in original music. But now I'm very much into like the oral skills phase of just like absorbing as much nuance. And so the reason why I put that statement up there is because as soon as I got to my oral skills phase, I was like, oh man, I think I understand how other people learn at this point. And so I've had to, of course, fine tune that. By no means is it finished now. I mean, I have plenty of students that I have to like do a few different things still. But whenever I encounter a student, I ask them to do like the same, like I'll ask them to play something and I'll ask them to play it like the same way, but I'll say it three different ways. And whichever way like resonates with them, I like go after that. Because like, yeah, you want to force your students to be able to do all these different things, but they have to have a comfort base in order for them to be ready to approach that. Now, there's also like the, well, you're in school, deal with it. And I believe that too. You know, closed mouths don't get fed, and soft palates will never be able to sustain, you know. But there has to be a level of confidence and comfortability in order for you to be vulnerable, right? So that's like where I'm coming from.
I think you touched on the fact that a really fantastic educator and teacher is someone who recognizes that everyone learns in a slightly different way, but also finds a way to spark that, to have it
Mm-hmm.
ignite to want to grow. I can't help but wonder, and I have had many different music teachers over the years myself. Maybe I didn't have the right teacher to that I to have me continue with my music.
You,
That's not to blame them. It's just
no,
not an understanding of the fact that I learned differently.
well, and without me going too deep into this, that was the problem I had with like the classical world. Um, it seemed extremely dogmatic, which I get, you know, like you're studying with one of the best people ever, so like you should probably adapt to them, but maybe not. You know, like I can honestly say I've probably played and studied with some of the best musicians to have lived so far. You know, I've not to flex too much. I mean, I played with David Sanborn, I played with Christian McBride, I've played with Rodney Whitaker, I've played with Mike D, and all of them like take people where they're at. I remember I was playing with Dave at the Blue Note for 3 nights, and he would call me between every set, and he would tell me something different. Like he'd be like, "Yeah, like do this," or like, "Hey, man, great. Can you go even further with that?" Like, and he would just like give me all these like little, but like it made sense. And like you know, we just lost Dave, unfortunately, but I remember him calling me, and like we only had 3 nights that I got to play an encounter with him. But man, those 3 nights were enough for me to last probably a lifetime. I remember Dave was just like extremely like positive to me, and then like there are like some shots that people got of us playing, and I see him like smiling in certain pictures, and then like I was like, oh, that makes sense why he called me and told me that later. You know, like all these things, and like this is like the thing. It's like all those people are like some of the top people in their field, yet they have patience and different options no matter the kind of musician they meet. You know, somebody who's extremely patient with me to this day, somebody who's a big brother and a current mentor for me, Mike Bees. I mean, he's been extremely kind, forthgiving. Um, his jokes are terrible, but they're great. And you know, he's been extremely great at explaining to me how to do things in a different way. But he also found the path of least resistance with me because he like he's slick. He was like he knew what kind of person I was, and so from there he formulated how to like get there. And now that's efficient, and that's where I learned with like how to like get through to that student, so that way like you can just it's just one curve, you know, and hopefully it's upwards, you
Well,
know.
we were talking earlier about the generosity of musicians, and it's something that actually came
Mm-hmm.
up in my recent interview with Isaiah J. Thompson. Is the Christian McBride and Bill Charlap, and when they see somebody has a spark and wants to learn, they'll take that time to, and just sit down with
Mm-hmm.
them and talk to them or try to teach them something. And I think I had read in an interview with you where that's something you have in the jazz world and it's not so much in the classical world.
Yeah, yeah, unfortunately, and that's the thing with like the classical world that I found to not be as hateful was how much hierarchy there is, which is I understand people deserve their depth, their respect, absolutely. Um, But normally the people that get those respects are really nice people. And now I just want to back up and say Mike Rylance was great for me. He was super cool to me. But there's plenty of other people in that world who are not. And Mike is not one of them. He's a wonderful guy. That's why we still keep in touch sometimes. He's really cool. But kind of going to that point, like in the class world, from what I saw, it was very much like you should be lucky to be here, versus like I remember I did essentially Ellington in my high school, like in 2011, and Elliot Mason was one of our mentors, and so was Marcus Prentice, and they were like, "Man, welcome to the party," as opposed to "Where's your pass?" And Elliot actually pulled me aside because he saw I was going to do the jam session. He gave me like a 30-minute lesson for free, and it was at that moment that I was like, "I don't want to play euphonium anymore." And I'm serious. I went on tour for drum corps that summer, and that really taught me I wanted to do jazz. So it was great, like to have those experiences, and like I got to tell this to Elliot years later, and he's been extremely cool to me, very nice and forthgiving, and like if it wasn't for that generosity that's embedded within the tradition of jazz music, yeah, I mean, I probably wouldn't have done jazz, so
Which
that's what
corps?
stole my heart.
Which corps were you involved in?
The Crossman.
I have gone to many DCI performances and competitions over
Ah,
the years, and they're a lot of fun. But boy, that's a grueling schedule.
I know, I know, I know.
I guess you don't miss it that much, huh?
No, it does not. It does not translate to a real life. It just doesn't. Like nobody is making their career um, doing that, like marching. And if you love it, great. It really helps whenever you like apply to be a band director because in Texas, of course, like marching band is huge. But the translation to the world of like being a professional musician and an educator, it's not really there. You know, it's cool as a brass junkie to like go listen to though, especially whenever the core sounds good.
I agree. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
lot of fun to attend, and just be able to hear it live is also a great thing.
yeah,
So I want to talk
absolutely.
about some of your mentors. I think JJ Johnson. In fact, I think you did you name your dog after JJ Johnson?
Yeah, yeah. My dog's named JJ. Yeah,
Your other dog is named Navy.
yeah, yeah.
So your mentors are JJ Johnson, Slide Hampton, Melba Liston, and Curtis Fuller.
Yeah, I would say not mentors, but more influences.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So because I only got to meet one of those people. I got to actually I came with my buddy who was doing some copyist work for Slide, and he had just a rehearsal at his apartment in Orange. I forget which Orange, but it was one of the oranges. And I remember I was like, man, can I just like go like listen? And Chris was like, I'm sure that'll be fine. And so I walk in, I was like, Mr. Hampton, my name is Altin, blah, blah. And he was like, do you play? I was like, yes. He was like, where's your horn? And so I go get my horn. And so I'm just warming up for no reason at this point. I just have my horn out, but I'm still playing. And then he starts rehearsal, and he's about to count off down, but he looks at me, he was like, what are you doing? I was like, and so his caretaker at the time was like, oh, Slide, he's not actually on the rehearsal. He was like, play my part. And so I play his part that entire rehearsal, and he's directing the ensemble. And so that was amazing. It was like 10 a.m. So like I was glad I was practicing a bunch at that point.
We were very
But
fortunate
that
recently. Oh, I'm sorry.
no. I was just gonna say like that was like that's a big reason why I moved to New York was that experience.
We were very fortunate recently to have one of the William Patterson University ensembles. It was a Slide Hampton tribute
I saw that
ensemble.
with it was with Richard, right?
No, it was a Isa Brownlow.
Oh, okay. I think I know that name.
And she's fantastic. She really is a great trombonist. And
Mm.
they decided was their decision of who they wanted to do for their ensemble and pursue the music and put it all together. And they did all the music off one of Hampton's albums, and yeah, it
Nice.
was fantastic, really fantastic.
I bet. I bet. Yeah.
I want to talk about your being a composer.
Hmm.
Your recent CD was just released called Discover the Present.
Hmm.
Information at the end of this interview will highlight his Alton's website as well as CDs and such. So stay tuned for that more detailed information. But I have to say, my two favorite songs on that are The Sunday After, which you
Oh,
had
nice.
mentioned has the Poinciana vibe, and
Hmm.
it really does. It's like walking down the a park in a park on a
Hmm.
sweet summer day. It's a beautiful,
Thank
uplifting,
you.
comfortable, relaxing song. It has that
Thank you.
exactly that vibe. And my other is Pocket of Clave.
Ah, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you. I'm really glad you enjoy those two originals for sure. I like whenever people enjoy the originals. Um, I also love whenever people enjoy the arrangements. But the originals for sure. Um, yeah, so like the composition part for me, it's deep because so I grew up in a smaller town as I mentioned, but my mom had a coworker, Glinda, and she had a husband, or she has a husband, that had a salsa band at the time. And so the trombone in salsa music is the prevalent one of the prevalent voices. It's like it's like yeah, it's like saxophone in a jazz ensemble. So the trombone is extremely prevalent. And so I went to go check out a rehearsal, and he was like, "Well, just bring your horn." I was like, "Okay, cool." So I brought my horn, and I got to sit in on the rehearsal. It was really cool. I was like 14, and so I was like, "Oh wow, like trombone is like actually like not just whole notes. It's not just like John Philip Sousa stuff. Which that's cool, but it's not as cool as salsa." And so I remember like playing, like, oh man, like I don't have to hold back. I can really, play. I can like actually play the way that I've always wanted to play. I don't feel like I'm getting this. So that was like my first love of commercial music, specifically salsa music. And I remember hearing like different, few different salsa songs. And so I got into that. And so at that point, I was really into like Maynard Ferguson, which is really cool for a couple of reasons. Maynard has a lot of zine, all those things. Amazing Showman, which is very similar to salsa. And so from Maynard, I was able to transition into Nat Adderley because Nat played extremely. I mean, he plays beautifully, but call a spade a spade. He plays the noise out of that trumpet. Oh my, or cornet. My bad. I mean, he plays the noise out of the cornet. Oh my gosh! Like there's a solo on the Trombone Master on the JJ album, and it's on Mysterioso, and Jay plays a great solo, but I'd rather listen to that. That one, I got to give it up, and that's the solo that drew me into swing. Was that exact solo? I absolutely love Nat's playing, and anybody who's like known me for a while, like people be like, what do you think like all of like favorite solo is? And it's probably not a trombone solo. It's probably that solo. And it's not because I don't love the trombone. I obviously love the trombone. Made a career out of it, or making a career out of it. But the amount of like just for lack of better words, manipulation of the horn that he's dealing with is like, man, I want to do that. I want to do that with the trombone. So salsa to Maynard to Nat, then to JJ, right? It was almost like raw to polished. Because JJ's like, in my opinion, the perfect sound on trombone, the control, the virtuosity. And some people like don't like that because they're like, oh, well, I don't really feel his soul. Well, maybe he's a little elevated and you're not there yet. And I'd be willing to say that to anybody. It's like JJ just set this gold standard that people are now pushing. But don't get it twisted. Like JJ, like has this utter amazing playing, and so because of that, my composition process has gone from that to that. It's like the rawness to like polish. And on Discover the Present, this album, I'm actually extremely happy with how the compositions have come off because I've been playing a lot more piano. I've been playing um trying to play with more restraint, trying to play with more maturity. And one of somebody who's on the album, I was like, man, like I noticed you didn't like go off like you normally do. I was like, yeah, I wanted this album to like be a really like mature showing of like restraint and like, I wanted my technique to shine through the way that JJ shined through, which is like there's no question on what this person is playing. There's no question on what the ability is, right? Um, and so like this album in particular was like a milestone for me because like I really spent time on each composition and like just try to dial it in as much as I could, listen to different music, listen to different like chord structures, all those things. So like this album for me compositionally is like is extremely personal because like I've always wanted to work on like my writing, my harmony, and we're always constantly working. But I feel like this album is actually a true representation of like what goes on in my head and actually finally putting it out. So like, but as far as composition, like a direct, this is a really long answer. But like as far as like this like this like way that I compose, I think about a lot of things in clave, a lot. It's just like where I'm coming from. A big part to me about music is that it should always dance. Um, you know, complicated music is lovely. I love playing complicated music too. And there's a place for it. But and you could always say like, why write music for me? Well, that's great. But don't you want other people to love it too? And I love having people love music, especially my music. And so, whenever you said like the Sunday after and Pocket of Clave, like those are the tunes that I was like, these are gonna make people like dance. And I remember in the studio whenever we did that, we actually recorded the Sunday after the very last tune. And then we did Pocket of Clave, and I remember I was like, man, it was like Pocket of Clave and Nuevo Dia. I was like, these two are gonna be like, you know, dancing ones, and like pacing is like, in my opinion, pacing is like that like getting to it kind of thing. So yeah, that's and then Maiden Voyage is like my modern take on like harmony and all that stuff. Not that I tried to outdo it because Herbie is a master, but I was like, man, I feel like I can like do some different stuff here. So
So
that's the
Discover
composition.
is your fifth CD, and
Mhm.
a goal I believe you set for yourself was to have 5 CDs finished before you turn 30.
Yes, yes, and I'll be 30 in July, so maybe 10. I'm
Congratulations to
actually
that.
recording. I'm recording my sixth CD next month in June, so I'm pretty excited.
You don't ever stop.
I mean, you know, you got to do it now. You got to do it now. I'm really fortunate to have a record label that's extremely supportive. So I of course do not take that for granted because my first three CDs I did on my own. So yeah,
So when you
so
compose, are you? I think you touched on this a little bit, but are you drawn to melody or style as you're composing? And then are you thinking about this is going to be perfect for a quintet or a trio or a big
mm,
band? Or do you just kind of, is it organic and then it starts with melody and then you decide what it's going to be for? Is it, or do you go the other way?
I have a hot take. I don't think composing is organic at all. I think composing is extremely well thought out and it's extremely the right word, well thought out, and it's there for a reason. Um, I think there's a lot of mystique in music, which there is. There's a lot of magic that we just like can't tell. But I do think the more mystique we put on it, the less inclusive it becomes, and that's something that music is not meant to be. Is like it's supposed to be inclusive. It's supposed to be like inviting, and like whenever I hear people like say, and this is a thing with jazz education that I noticed, like, and luckily it's being reversed, especially in the recent years. But like whenever I hear people say like, well, you just gotta like do your own thing or not. You didn't do your own thing whenever you were 3. Like if you're in your first year as a freshman at a university, you are an infant. Like that's okay. You're supposed to be an infant. If you didn't want to learn more, then you wouldn't go to school. But here we are, you know. So like I don't like whenever people are like, I just, kind of comes to me, maybe. I don't think so though. Like writing a piece of music is extremely intentional, like we don't have to add like this different layer of like non-inviting of we don't have to invite this layer of we don't have to have this layer of like the non-inviting way of music. Like music is supposed to be for social gathering, communal sources of and like building community and those communal aspects. So tell people what's going on. So like what I do, and by no means am I like some great or excellent composer. It's just I've had some really cool exposures to different music. Is I tell people exactly the process. So for example, let's talk about the Sunday after. So the Sunday after, I was like, man, I just got done recording my very first record with Positone Records. Like, I have a record deal. Wow, I'm so happy. So the day after my first recording session, which was In Good Standing, my fourth album, I was like, I want to write something that's so simple and singable. I want it to be almost church-like. Um, I have a lot of friends who are believers, and myself, I am one too. But I have a lot of friends who grew up in the church. I grew up Catholic, so unfortunately, I didn't get the same experience as they did musically. But that's neither here or there. Now I have the outlook to be able to look at other sources for music, and so I was like, man, I want to write something that's peaceful. I want to write something that's like reminiscent of a dance, but I also want to keep it very singable. And so I was like, let me do it in a key that I'm not good at. So I did it in D major. I'm not good at D major. Now I am, but at the time I was not. And so I was like, let's just start with the root, like start with the root. And I was like, okay, now I don't want to swing this though, because like swing is you can dance and swing. I love dancing with the swing beat. But I was like, man, there's something deeper here that could be an offshoot. So I was like, well, I think we just thought Ahmad Jamal at that point or something like that. I was like, man, I want to do like a Poinciana. Or maybe I was listening to like a lot of gospel music. I cannot remember. It's one of the two. But I was like, man, let me try this with a Poinciana. And so I was like, okay, this melody is really singable, cool, and there's like a Poinciana. Now let me add some harmony, but I don't want to keep it like I don't want to be like jazz school weird. I want to like keep it extremely relevant to like the way people listen to music on the radio. And so I was like, okay, well, let me do this. So I did like 1, 4, minor 6, 2, 5, 1, 4, and then I just did a quick little modulation to F major, and then I went back 2, 5, 1. You know, and so if you notice, like I didn't tell you once, like I just kind of looked up at the sky. No, like I was very intentional with what I was doing. You know, and you're supposed to be. If you're not intentional with what you're doing, why are you doing something? So like composing to me has a lot to do with like how you as a person can construct a plan for you to be successful. Composition is a plan for success. um and some people be like, well, I just don't think about music that way. Good for you. um but I think that it's very base. Like whenever I hear like, well, just people like do your own thing, very uninviting. That's not inclusive of like this music. You want to invite people to contribute to this lineage so that way we keep pushing the music forward. That's the main mission. It's keep pushing this music forward. And so the only way you can do that is by pulling somebody else along to slingshot them above you, you know? And so with composition, I think about every aspect because I want to make sure that I'm covering every basis. Because in the studio, whenever somebody asks me a question, I don't want to be like, just vibe out. That's not helpful unless it's like a normal person in your band. And luckily, Art Hirahara is a mainstay in my band. So I could actually say to Art, like, kind of put a vibe on it, feel it out first. And then, let's talk about it. And even then, that's more instruction than just like vibe out. You know, that's not gonna that's not gonna create that effect that I think people want. And if it does, good for you. I wish I had that same power. I need to take lessons from that person if that's the case. But it's just important to be clear, concise, meticulous, and inviting. in order for like this music to remain pushed, and in order for your music to remain um, conscious and inclusive. You know, so that's like my composition process. I really like hammer it out, but generally I start with melody first. But I've started with harmony first, and I've made some fine compositions on it. But the ones that I'm noticing, I've been playing. So Discover the Present, I played every single one of those melodies on the piano first,
Oh.
and that's how I like got it. And then whenever it comes to harmony, I'm normally like, oh, I need something like this, or I need something like this on the record. I need to do this. So that's where it comes from. But it's like that Rolodex. You got to have a Rolodex of things, which is why you have to be listening a lot and like actively listening, not just like, sounds good. You have to like search for something that you want.
Well, you have such a foundation of especially not just musicians, but of genres. So that's what you can draw on, which is um, what a lot of teachers I've interviewed and spoken to is their encouragement of people to students especially to hear as much live music as possible, to just absorb and listen and just get
Mhm.
it almost into your DNA, and that way
Yes.
you can draw on it. There's that very famous clip of Ella Fitzgerald singing, and boy, her Rolodex must have been humongous, but she's, scatting in for like 25 minutes and she's pulling out, I think it's in a PBS special about her, and she pulls out unbelievable amounts of music and references. And so I think a musician
Mhm.
has that in their brain. It's your own little computer to just kind of flip through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly it. Yes.
So one of the questions I have, well, we're going to talk a little bit about who you play with, but because you have played in different styles, that we'll get to my question. So you played with John Lee, who I had the great
Mhm.
pleasure of meeting several times here at the library, and that's how I met you. And
Yes. Yeah. John is the forever connector.
he is, and he played with the Dizzy Gillespie All Star Big Band. You
Mhm.
played also with Dee Dee Bridgewater, Christian McBride, Michael Bublé, but you also played with the Temptations, the Four Tops, and Martha Reeves. So now you're talking
Mhm.
Motown versus jazz. How is that different for you playing?
Mhm.
And also like Michael Bublé kind of also bridges a little bit between the
Mhm.
different styles. So I just like to have you expand on that a little bit.
For sure. It's probably going to be a lot of it. Um, so as a brass player, there's certain things that you have to have. Number one, I just did a master class on this yesterday. Um, you have to have an adaptable sound. So generally, whenever something's clear, it's easier to input somewhere else because then you can overlay it, right? There's nothing worse than getting a blurry image and trying to like blow it up. It doesn't look good, right? Especially like in Canva. But whenever you have a clear image, you're able to do whatever you need to do and make it fit where it needs to fit. So your sound should be clear. Okay. As a brass player, your sound, it needs to be clear. Unless you're just touring your own project, good for you. Teach me, man. But as a freelance trombonist, you have to have a clear sound. You have to have control over your articulation and your dynamics, and you have to know how to play in a section. So the Temptations of Four Top for my very first tour that I ever did. So I went to Michigan State for my master's, and Detroit is about an hour away. And but the person that contracts them for the horns in Detroit, they live in Lansing or in East Lansing. So I was recommended, and so I jumped at the opportunity. Oh my gosh, because it was Otis Williams and Duke, like the original, um, and they both own the patent, you know. So if you notice, if it's like the Temptations review, that's not the Temptation. But if it's the Temptations of Four Top, that's the Temptation of Four Top. Anyways, I'm getting into that. So like playing in a Motown section is extremely close to playing in a big band. And that's because those players that are on all those Motown sessions did big bands. So you have to know that. But number two, there's a difference way to end notes. There's a different way to start notes. There's a different way to crescendo and decrescendo. There's a different way to follow the lead trumpet player. And then there's a much different way on how to approach playing your chair compared to a jazz ensemble. In a jazz ensemble, it's pretty not self-explanatory, but you're playing third trombone. You're normally having the harmony parts. You need to play as strong as your lead player in order to fulfill the harmony parts. If you're playing fourth trumpet, you're normally in line with the lead trombone, right? So that means you need to listen to the lead trombonist a lot. Self-explanatory. However, in a Motown section, whenever you're playing lead trombone or second trombone, you're normally playing one of the tenor chairs, okay? Because they're thinking about sound conception, not part. Okay, they're thinking about sound conception. So a tenor voice needs to play this certain line. A low voice needs to play their own line. The high voice needs to play this. Whereas in jazz ensemble, we're very mixy, mixy matchy, all that, which is great, and that's the beauty that came from Duke Ellington. But whenever it comes to the Motown stuff, you have to be aware of where your line fits in the overall soundscape. A classic Motown horn section is 10 pieces, 5 saxes, 3 trumpets, 2 trombones, right? So that's like the Motown thing, and learning like where you belong in the mix. As far as a jazz ensemble thing, I kind of explained it. That's like our bread and butter. But just understanding what part you're playing. If you're playing lead trombone in the big band, you have a lot more allowance than you would on third trombone or second trombone, right? If you're playing lead trumpet, you control it. I have the pleasure to play with Frank Green, throughout the year, and that's the best lead trumpet player in the business. There's no, there's no other. I don't care who you are. Frank Green is the best in the business, and he lays it down. He plays lead in the Disney All Star Big Band, and if you can, as a section player, you got to be able to fit into your lead trumpet sound, and that's a jazz ensemble specific. As a Motown player, you have to be able to fit in your soundscape sound, right? That's two different ways of thoughts. Now with Michael, with Bublé, like he actually plays a very classic big band way, even the pop stuff, but he doesn't do big band anymore. I should add. So like he does. So whenever I was in his band, it was big band, and it's trombone section, so 4 trumpets, 4 bones, 5 saxes. But his rhythm section would definitely change styles because Michael does pop and jazz. It's a funny joke. He's a pop jazz artist. That's what we call it, pop jazz. So anyway, all that being said, in Michael's band, it's pretty similar to jazz ensemble. Um, and that's about it with that. But with like a salsa band, for example, the trombone has a completely different line separate from most people normally. Unless it's like ammonia, then y'all are like in harmony, right? But as far as like playing in a salsa band versus all the other bands, like in a salsa band, you have a lot more free reign to have harsher articulations, or a lot more free reign to have much bigger loud as opposed to like in jazz ensemble, right? Because you don't want to go past a great sound in jazz ensemble, but in salsa music, normally the vocal, normally like the lyrics indicate some kind of like something like that allows you to go past that. But that's understanding the music, understanding the what the lyrics mean, and that's why some people like you should know the lyrics, and it's true, you should, in order for you to like better understand the song and like what that song really means. So that's kind of like my crash course.
That's it. That's interesting that you say that because, and you're the first person I've ever heard say that you should know the lyrics because you have your composer, you have your lyricist, and sometimes they're the same people and sometimes they're
Mm-hmm.
not.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always thought of them as separate things. So that's a very interesting thing.
Yeah, I mean, and like the more you think the less you do. So it's a constant battle.
As we start to wrap up here, there's one last thing that I came across that I found fascinating as you as an educator, and it's from a interview you did with Bold Journey, and
Oh
it
yeah.
talks about three things that you have learned, and I'm assuming that you're trying to also teach the students the three skills. One is
Mm-hmm.
resilience, one is being prompt, and one is the being okay to say no. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Being o being okay to say no or being okay to be told no.
All three. All
Well,
three.
I just want to clarify. Did I say? I think I said being okay to be told no.
Yeah. Your three skills are resilience, being prompt, and being okay with the word no.
Oh, okay, okay, cool.
Yeah, thank you. Because you
S-
had there are two parts to your being okay with the word no,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
which, yes, I misspoke. Thank
No,
you.
no, it's all good. I mean, I could have said something different. That's why I wanted to ask. So resilience. Resilience is like my life. Um, I'm pretty transparent about these stories, but like whenever I first auditioned for jazz school, I didn't get in anywhere really. I got into Texas State because of Freddie. But I didn't really get in because my grades were crap. They were terrible. But I was like an Eagle Scout. I did a bunch of volunteer work, and honestly, I would just skip class to go practice. But I really wasn't practicing correctly. So I didn't get into school really until like April of like the senior year. When most people know where they're going, like in February or March, or May, or January, February, March, right? So like my grades were a really bad thing, and then what's it called? And then like whenever I got to college, I was messing around, lost my scholarship, right? And let me see what else. No, those are like the bad things. Yeah, I didn't do well in a bunch of my classes for my first 2 years either. So I had the opportunity to transfer to UT because Freddie was leaving to move to Indianapolis for another position. So I had to go find a new teacher because I didn't want to stay at Texas State. And I'll just leave it at that. And so I wanted to go to UT because Andre was there. And so Jeff Helmer, the director of jazz studies at the time, who was also the associate director of the School of Music, was like, "Well, Alton, we need trombonists, but your grades are terrible. Um, I need to write a letter to the admissions board." So he wrote a letter, and I got it. And man, it was yeah, it was crazy because I transferred into UT with a 2.67 GPA, you know. And then that first year at UT, dean's list, you know. It's about the environment that you're in, and it's about the kind of people that you're around. And I have a lot of friends from Texas State still. Two of them I love dearly. Um, but the thing is, resilience comes from being okay to change your environment and just start over. And so resilience also comes from like being told no. Resilience comes from like making mistakes. You can't be resilient if you've never made a mistake. Does that make sense? Like resilience is not just like this born gift. It's just not. It's a learned trait. Um, and so that learned trait comes from failure. And so this is like something that I have a big opinion on. Like, I don't believe we should have teachers who came in just like 4.0 every single semester, right? How do you teach a student who doesn't do that? How can you teach a student if you've never made that mistake? Or if you did make a 4.0, then great. Then what else did you do outside of school? Because if you only lived in school, do you know how to function as a human being? You're teaching human beings, right? And I'm not saying we should be hiring people that get like 1.5 GPAs. Um, but those people probably have a lot more insight on how to fix a screw up, and I'm one of those people. Um, which is why like in my teaching methods, I want to meet the student where they're at and then, you know, but like you have to establish that comfortability, right? But resilience comes from failure. So I'm not telling people to go out here and just fail all the time. But if you do, okay, it's okay. It's completely fine. There's no reason that like failure has to be like this huge thing. It's a natural thing. Like this morning, I was like, I'm gonna give a 10-15. I didn't give him a 10-15. I got him a 10-30, you know? And so, I failed on that. That's okay. I made it on time to my appointment, or at least partly. Um, but like having resilience is what's gonna get you through the next day and the next month and the next year. There's plenty of opportunities that I want, but I've been told no for. And I can just be like, well, I'm hanging it up. That's it. I'm done. This is, and a lot of people do, and I get it. It can be tough out here. wanting to do the freelancing, get booked at clubs, all these things. But at the end of the day, like resilience is what's going to like provide you experience, wealth, and knowledge. So like resilience is huge to me. The second one is
Goes hand in
promptness.
hand with the journey can sometimes teach you more and give you more than actually attaining your goal. You have to go from A through B and C to get to D, and B and C may have
Yes,
been very challenging, but you would not have gotten to D otherwise. And I just find that I also believe in that that you have to experience the good and the bad to sometimes get to where you need to be.
progress, not perfection. That's a Rodney Whitaker quote. Prof Whitaker. And then as far as like the next thing being prompt, we live in New York. I get it. It is what it is. But man, if that's you every time, there's an issue. There's an issue. And, some people will forever be able to get away with that. Life's not fair in that way. But I know for me, communication increases the relationship, which increases faith, trust in that person. If your communication is not good, your promptness better be fantastic. If your communication is great, you have a little bit more wiggle room. But like you have to be willing to put in time to be communicated and like at least give yourself the opportunity to explain what's going on. So this morning, I asked, hey Patty, instead of 11, could we do 11:10? My wife's in an interview. I hope that's okay. There was no vibe. It was just like, hey, I'm being transparent. I just wanted to let you know. And so we were able to start the interview, not have any bad qualms. If I just would have like left you there for 10 minutes, that wouldn't have been a good look. It would have been like, who's this guy? You know? So being prompt has to do with communication. Your communication will inform your promptness. Your promptness will inform your communication. Once again, if you're always like doing something, then it's not a mistake. That's just who you are. And so Diego Rivera, this one of my professors at Michigan State, he was like, "It's okay if you're late. It's okay if like that you rush, but then you have to accommodate it. If you know that you're late and you say the gig starts at 11, for you it starts at 10:30, so that way you can get there at 11. You know, if you know you rush, call it slower, so that way whenever you get to that tempo, it's still comfortable. You know, you have to accommodate yourself. You just do, or else it's gonna be a hard life.
So that's a lot of
Um,
self-awareness, really, of knowing how your personality affects not only professionalism but also
mhm.
musicianship.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, I have a mantra. All my students know this, and if they see this, they're gonna be like, "Oh, here we go." Um, and my mantra is awareness, consistency, and intention. Anybody who's good at anything in the world, not music, anything, they have those three things: awareness, consistency, and intention. Always, and that's like my life mantra. So,
That goes for everything, and everything that we do, in any type of work we do, or anything that we try to accomplish.
exactly. Um, and then, and then, and then the thing is, whenever, whenever like the word no comes up, the word no is good and bad. The word no makes you become really resilient. The word no makes you become extremely aware. The word no does all these things. However, the word no can also be impactful in a negative way as well. But that forces you to use an appropriate perception of like what you're dealing with.
But conversely, there is also learning the ability to say no.
Yeah, for sure. And like, but that only comes from knowing how much you can take. So like establishing boundaries, I have an issue whenever people are like, well, here's my boundaries. Well, how do you know that? Have you like gone too far? No, I just know. Come on, what are we doing here? Like, you can have boundaries once you've violated both sides. Now I'm not saying you have to like go extra, but like the dogmatic absolutism thing is extremely good, for like establishing who you want to be, but it can be also detrimental whenever you don't actually know because you haven't given yourself the time to mess up. You know, messing up is so great and it's also horrible, but it can be both. Not everything has to be, you know. Now, for example, like I want $1 million. I think we can objectively say that's great. Maybe it's not you're into maybe not for the taxes, but that's a million more than you had. So I guess we're kind of getting into like I'm an optimist and a realist, not really a pessimist. But that's just who I am as a person. And everybody's different. That's okay. But boundaries teach us everything there is to know about ourselves. Boundaries also teach us everything there is to know not about ourselves, what we don't like, you know, give yourself time to know that you don't like something. It's not a waste of time if you're figuring yourself out. If not, then you're saying that you're a waste of time. And I don't think anybody feels that way about one another.
I think you're being a realist is a really great thing as a teacher because with so many young musicians trying to break into an industry that is very saturated, right? I think that's
Mm-hmm.
a way of saying it. It's very hard to break through, and so to have a teacher who gives you these life lessons that really will help you, that are pragmatic and that will help you actually succeed if you can apply them. I think it's very refreshing to hear.
Oh, good. Yeah, I try. I try. But, some people don't like that too. And that's okay.
So I
You know,
did want to wrap this up. I read that you're of Mexican and Turkish descent,
hmm
and that your surname translates to entertainer.
loosely. It's like, so my dad grew up in Istanbul for like 15, 14 years. And like, our name is somewhere in like the entertainer musician circle. It's loosely translated, but it's definitely in that realm. And then
Well,
Altin means gold.
oh, so you're a golden entertainer.
I guess so. Whatever that means.
Let's make it a positive, right?
Yes, yes. I try to not take myself too seriously on that, but it definitely comes in handy whenever I'm feeling blue about something like, man, I was born for this. You
At
know,
least your last name doesn't mean like candle maker or butcher.
yeah, yeah. Although butchers are cool, man. I'm super into steak recently, so it's like, that would be pretty cool. But I have to limit my red meat. So,
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time today, and it is such a pleasure to interact with you. The times we have when
thanks,
you play
Patty.
here, and everyone check out his website, check out his CDs, and follow him on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, and you won't be disappointed. And try to see him live as soon as you can. So thanks again for joining me, and see you soon.
Thanks, Patty.